Welcome everybody to this Doc Talks episode this week. We're going to be talking about the campus model. It's not new really, although this rendition may be a little bit new. I think it's pretty exciting. And today's guest is actually Greg Ott, pastor out at Chalice Christian Church out in the Virginia Beach area. He spent some time on a sabbatical, which I was really pleased because I love to dream. I just love it. People who can actually put some data and some structure around some of the ideas. And so we're just going to talk about this because I think it's needed in the church. I see it in so many places, a new model or a new way of thinking about ways to thrive, not just survive, but thrive. And I think Greg will talk about that a little bit. But again, we're going to be talking about the campus model. I'm going to let Greg sort of introduce himself and talk about it and his work on it. And then we hope that you will ask questions, because that's what these Doc Talks are designed to do, is to help the church grow stronger. This is a ministry of the Christian Church in Virginia, but we do it in such a way some of the topics are open to the rest of the church as well. So we're glad to have people join us or watch this later. So let me introduce to you Greg Ott, and let him tell you about his project, and then we'll begin the conversation. Greg, tell us about the campus model.
All right. Thank you for this invitation. I have been, I think, way out of the box, always have. And one of the things that I have been wrestling with is in my entire ministry, I've been serving smaller congregations. And there's a need. So I saw this need of how can we combine resources. And so when I took my sabbatical, I wanted to dive into that more in a different way. I've served two churches now that were merged. And what happens with a merged church is you lose one congregation. So we're not gaining congregations, we're just realigning the congregations, right? Putting them all together. So I wanted to look at a model that instead of survival, how do we come up with a model that we are not throwing out the life preserver, but getting in the boat and starting the motor and just going off into the sunset? And that's kind of what that's the direction that I did this research. And I want to start by saying I don't have all the answers. I just started putting down the ideas, came up with a project that tried to deal with all the different things, our understanding of polity, our understanding of congregational run, our understanding where the minister is, and how does that fit the disciples? It's great to have a model, but if it doesn't fit who we are, it's not going to work, right? So I wanted to see if we could do it together. So that's kind of where I'm wanted to start, and that's what I'm doing. So the dialogue is important for us to learn. So let me tell you the positives. I'll break down two areas. I'm going to talk about the positive and what I understand from the ministry part, the ministry team, and then I'll talk about the congregation and where I see what I have found, how congregations work and thrive on it. One of the things, and one of the reasons this is not a survival model, is the models that work, and I looked at a bunch of them in Europe, actually. It takes 2 to 3 years, in some places 5 years, for everything to come together and then to start to work. And that's not because of constitutions and bylaws, is because everybody needs to get to know one another, right, and work together. And so it's not something you just jump into, because it can implode on itself pretty quickly. The positive for minister is you have a team minister. This is the model that I kind of gravitated towards, and it's a ministry team serving 2 or more congregations. The recommendation is to have one clergy, whether it be full-time or part-time, more than the number of churches that are in the community. So let's just say if you have 2 churches that want to work together, you have 3 clergy, not all full-time, but part-time. Some clergy roles work, some would not. A music minister would not work in a community setting because you got the choir and you got worship all at the same time, right? So that would be a very difficult. But youth ministry, youth and children and family, visitation minister, an evangelist, outreach and mission, those kinds of areas, more than one minister would work together. I see it. You have to have a team leader. All right, the team, one minister would be in charge of not dictating what everybody does, but trying to keep all the systems working together. Because if you have a church, if you have, let's just say we have a youth minister and they're supposed to be at this church on this day and working with this youth group on this day or whatever, you want to try and keep that organized. So someone needs to know, what that process is. So the pluses that I can see with this is the ministers are entrenched in what their passion and what their ministry, their call is. A lot of times soul pastors, at least in my experience, we're doing everything. Whether it is our passion, our gift or not, we're doing it all. And there's nothing wrong with that. But it also can tire you out pretty quickly, where if you had someone to share that, just for example, a youth minister, if a youth minister, their whole goal is to work with the youth. The more youth for youth minister, the better they are, the better excited they are. And so and kids, they don't mind combining youth groups. Where there's challenges is where we're combining up the adult leaders and the other members of the church as to who does what. So I can see that, and you have the extra minister because you do rotation. Like one minister will be preaching at one church for a segment of time, and let's just say a season of the church, okay, whether it be Lent or Advent, that's just easy. And another minister be at the other church. When if one of the ministers has to go away, is sick, you already have a minister on staff who already knows what the themes are, already knows what the program is. So, I mean, it's a true teamwork situation. So those are they're just some examples. I'm sure you all can come up with even more examples of how this could be helpful for clergy and to be focused and stay on task with what they do. So I see that as a role, as a model, because everybody's involved and engaged in what the lives of those churches. The congregations, I played with this and I looked at several different examples in Africa, actually. And one of the things they said is really for this to work, church should not be more than 10 miles or 20 miles apart from one another because you spend all your time traveling. You don't want to do that. I mean, the goal and this model is to just really enhance and excite the church to move forward, sharing resources, sharing clergy, and sharing congregation members. So let me stop there a second and let some people.
Yeah, I do want to, because part of the reason why I'm having this conversation is we have lots of churches that are close enough to each other. I mean, the other reason why I thought about this conversation would be really valuable is because I grew up not necessarily in this model, but a similar idea when you have two churches close by. I grew up in a church where we had our pastor, but we were growing and we needed to move to a second pastor, but we couldn't quite afford that pastor, but we really needed a youth and family pastor. And the church nearby was a rural church and they needed a pastor, but they couldn't afford full time. So we essentially created a campus. We didn't call it that back then. But it allowed both churches to really have a youth pastor, but also that church, then our youth pastor became their normal preaching pastor, but we often then did things together. We did retreats together. It kind of connected us and shared resources. And I think when churches are close enough to each other, what you're laying out is 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 a great idea, because then everybody benefits. I mean, in the sense that you have more resources. Too oftentimes, what churches need, they can't afford,
Mhm.
um, and they really need this one component. But together, amazingly, we are able to uh, sometimes even go to 2.5 ministers,
Mm.
where that kind of thing. So um, I like this. I'd be interested to see what the questions are.
Greg, I'm Jonathan
Yes.
Webster. Hope you're doing well.
Good.
I wondered if you looked at, any technology, using technology to do this. When I first saw the advertisement for the DOCTALKs, I kind of thought of the megachurch model where, the senior pastor is preaching in one city, but there might be 4 to 5 churches that he or she is broadcast into, around the state or even around the country. So, and you could imagine something that might have some work in even a smaller scale where a child's Christian might be able to be broadcast over to a church, 30 minutes away. The elders will do everything except you will come in and preach on screen. So did you look at any technology in any of those models where the pastor actually stays at one church, but is broadcast to another church?
Yes, I did. And that's a great question. One of the I looked at several models of that, and then looked behind the curtain to see what those clergy uh, um, sig- what they were claiming on it. Now, not some of the real big churches, because that's how they survive, but they said there's a disconnect with that model, and um, they weren't as. And I was looking at other leaders within the congregation as to see what they thought about it, and they said they never got a chance to see their pastor. It was more like watching TV. So I didn't know if that. I'm not totally against it, but it was interesting. The leaders of those churches um, said they'd like to have the minister be close by, and to be able to touch them and all that kind of stuff, actually have face to face. So uh, I didn't disregard it, but and they talked about it in several places, but I went on behind to say, okay, so what are some of the leaders saying? And it was not as positive as the uh, congregation members who said, oh yeah, it's great because I can just watch Pastor Bill come in and say the message, and then, Pastor George, man, he's there when we come out and he welcomes us, shakes his hand, all that. And the congregation were more excited about that than the leadership. So I hope that answers your question. um,
Yeah, let me address that, because I'm going to do a follow-up conversation to this too, because this is a model that part of the feeder into it is that it's oftentimes used by new churches that are growing, that outgrow their building, so they create a second campus, but they also have staff that serve that campus. You can clearly do that, but I think what Greg's addressing is that people do like to have a person in that. But we're going to do a follow-up conversation with some people who do this campus model from the new church model or growing church model. But today what we're talking about is 2 churches that already exist. And instead of the oh my gosh, we guess we're going to have to merge or close, this is a model I think lets us thrive. I'm going to go to Bill out in Northern Lights. Bill, you had a question?
Yep, trying to unmute. There we go. I'm wondering if in any of your studies, if you saw any interdenominational combinations where a disciples church and a church from another denomination tried to use this model, and if so, was it successful, or what were their issues?
I did. And again, most of the models that I saw that are working are in Europe and Africa. And there were more usually two. I didn't see more than 3 different denominations together, but 2. And because they're still independent, they're sharing, they still have their board, they still have their own identity. They're sharing the clergy. It worked well. I mean, it worked with no problem. The issue then became, is the general church okay with it? And I don't mean our general church. Like, it was, the one was a Methodist group, and I can't remember if it was Presbyterian. I can't remember which one. I'm sorry, Bill, but they didn't have a problem working with that, and it was all up to the clergy worked well with that, whichever tradition they were working with. So yeah. And I thought it would be neat to do an interfaith to even carry it even further. I mean, that's really thinking out of the box, but how cool would that be? I mean, so I'm with you, Bill. I thought that would be amazing, actually. So
Thank you.
yeah, you're welcome.
Let me follow,
Financially, oh, I'm sorry.
let me follow up that just a little bit with, so there is an example of similar in Minneapolis, Minnesota. There was a Lutheran and a Disciples and a UCC, large building churches that had declined. They, over a few years, came together in one building, did not merge, but then address some of the issues that you go in there. And they created one building worship center, community center, and they redesigned that building, one of the big building churches, so that the sanctuaries, I mean, there are 3 sanctuary areas, and they rotate throughout the year so nobody gains possession, but allowed them to spend less money on building, do ministry together, do Sunday school education together, but not merge. So there's still 3 distinct congregations there, but so that's a model to look at as well. It's a little different than this one because they actually moved into one location, but similar.
I was just going to say, one of the things too that I found very interesting was that they took, the minister's packages, again, full-time minister, the part-time minister, whatever, and they took it and they divided it by the two churches. Or I saw models where they had 3 churches and 4 clergy, and when they divided it by, it was actually cheaper to have 3 pastors than it was to have 1, just because you're dividing it up. And it was definitely affordable to have 3 pastors and have a multi-staff with one of them paying for it. So again, that was one of the issues that I did see, or one of the things I wanted to look at. So yeah.
I wanted to ask your opinion, if I could, about whether you saw any difference between congregation. Did you look at congregations that were equally sized, or congregations that maybe one of them was larger than the other, and what dynamics that might represent in the relationship between the 2 congregations?
Yeah, it's a great question. I did look at that, and the closer they were to size, the easier the model worked. Now, that doesn't mean that it can't work. It's just that they got along better. The ones that were large and when one small, now if it was a large one with 2 small ones, there wasn't this aggressive, I'm going to take you over type of attitude. But when it was one large and a small one, they said, well, let's just all come over here and let's just all be in the same sandbox. And that was a challenge. It worked. That one's one of those that took 3 and 4 years because the congregations had to learn to do the dance with each other. But I did look at both models. The closer they are to size, again, it doesn't have to be big. They can all both be small, or all 3 be small, but they seem to work better, get along better together that way. Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, that's kind of a great segue. I'll real quick talk about some of the pros and cons with the congregations. The congregations are the key, especially in disciples where we're congregational run. That was the model that was where I wanted to try and tweak to make sure that they don't look at us coming in and being this hierarchical clergy team coming in and say, okay, you got to do this, you got to do that, and all that kind of stuff. It has to start by through the congregation. And the positive is, it is every model I looked at said, and the positives were financially, we can have more than one clergy staff and be able to afford it, whatever the size was. And they split it up. There was a case, Bob, to kind of piggyback on what you said, where there was a congregation that was bigger, had a little bit more money than the other one, and they kind of just said, well, look, we'll pay, instead of 50-50, we'll pay 60, you pay 40, so that we can get this to work. And they ended up getting it up to 50-50. I mean, so it is a model to grow, not to survive. I mean, things have, every model that I looked at in this context that worked in harmony with one another, unified, they grew. I mean, it just happened. It grew. It was an exciting possibility. The challenges for congregations is, again, and there's a major covenant. And here's that they talked about, and that is working together. And they give the lead minister, and I don't want to say, they give him authority in the sense that he or she could help determine where a minister or one of the colleagues could go. For example, if you have this is an easy example. If you have a visitation minister who happens to be a retired clergy and only wants to work certain hours, go to the hospital and stuff. If someone dies and they want to, they would do the funeral, but they say, well, we really like the senior pastor to come to the, or we like him to come to him or her to come to the funeral and be part of the funeral. You can do all those kinds of things. There's no, that's only my territory, this is my territory. They work together, and those are the models that really work. The challenge is, and where it implodes, is when some congregations say, you know what, I really like Bill Spangler-Dunning. He's part of the team, but we'd like to have him for ourselves. So they try and disconnect from the community. And there's where there's some challenges. To say, no, you're getting into this community. This is something that we want to hang into. This is the covenant we're going to hang on to. So those were some of the biggest, where it failed. That was the biggest place where they said, we decided now we don't want to, we got big enough now, and this is where we wanted to be. So now we don't want to be a part of the community, this community church or a community gathering. So.
Do you have examples of those covenants that you could share with us?
Actually, I do, and it's this is work that another gentleman did, and I didn't bring all that stuff with me. Bill, do you remember the guy that I was using his some research he had done on church mergers? You knew him. I can't remember his name.
You talking about from Upper Midwest? You muted. Yeah, you muted your mic there.
Right, they're getting him fixed up. He's
Sorry.
There you go.
Who asked for the information? Because I can send it to you. Was it Bob?
Yes,
Okay.
and I'll put my email in the chat.
Okay, perfect. Yeah.
Dan.
We have a question.
Sure, go ahead, Dan and Bobby.
Okay, Dan. Well, I'm speaking right now for me, and I have questions, but some background also. Do I tell where we're from, or do you know where we're from?
I do.
Okay, I know you do.
It's all good.
Okay, well, I've been the member of the congregation forever. And one of the things that you mentioned, I remember we had a pastor for 10 years who the situation happened with when you commented on 2 churches that were in West Virginia, they decided to join. So 2 pastors lost their jobs. They decided to go out and do somebody else. Now we had that pastor for 10 years. I could see how what you were talking about, how that, happened. Also, then we've had a interim pastor for a year, almost 2 years, I guess, or a year and a half. So, we got accustomed to them and everybody comfortable. So right now we have called a pastor who came with us. Now for years and years, I've been very involved ever since I was young, 10, 12, whatever, in this church. We have a church and churches in Roanoke, the whole valley. Some have closed up or lost their church, lost a disciple church. Some have very few members, and us, of course, we have gone down during the pandemic. We have a church less probably than 5 miles from us and our last pastor before that left us during the pandemic. So we've had a church that's been within 5 miles of us. I, over the years, could not understand or why we couldn't be together on some things. We knew what they were doing. We knew what we did. We had camps. We had Craig Spring. We had youth that the kids play ball together. They do activities, but we've never been able, I'm hoping now, be able to connect. We have one paid staff besides, the music and the secretary. They have a senior pastor. Now they have, I think, a co-pastor or associate pastor. They also have Christian education. And I've over the years, I know who they are, that we've talked and everything. Right now, this is we could be an example if we could get this started now. We had 15 kids, youth, that all came through our church. Right now, I can name them all. They're all very JMU, Liberty University, all of them, they did good. Some of those kids didn't even know about Craig Spring or even didn't, it wasn't not taught, but to get together. When our kids, we got together with another church and we shared, when they went to camps and conference, they shared getting there and everything and whatever. So this right now, I would think would be a great idea for the Roanoke area.
Yeah, I think that's exactly why I'm having this conversation. I mean, I think there are places all over this region, probably all over our church.
Yes.
But timing is part of it. As regional minister, when I'm doing searches, I'm looking for opportunities when we can have those conversations, because what you just hit on is the reason why we haven't done it before. We're really good at silos, particularly in larger cities. Our churches want to be separate, and we established them that way. But this is a way of thinking a little differently, that nobody loses their identity, but we have to think differently rather than merging or coming together,
right?
But sharing staff. And that's where doing this in an intentional way or getting there is the trick, and the timing and how we go about that. And that's where I think Greg's done some good work on that. So
right. And see, a lot of people don't look at their emails. They don't follow the church. I happened to see this and read all the way through it and thought, would like to do that now. So I loved it because there are 2 churches. I know these churches so well. There's a disciple church now that's probably going to go another way because I know them. And I had tried to get one of the ladies to come here because I don't even think they contact the regional minister. I don't think you have any contact with him. And that's another disciple church right now that we're going to lose. We've lost 2 for sure. And then the others are hanging on. Now, for Fort Lewis, we've not hung on too many times. We've made it, So, but you all know what I'm saying.
Yep, it's great. Dan, Greg, can you comment? Yeah, I know you even are working on your own experience right now of how to maybe get to this model as well in your area.
Yeah, Hilton, go ahead.
I was just going, finish
'Cause I
up.
saw your hand up.
The question is a little different. So finish up with this one and then I'll make my question.
Okay. And so your example is exactly why it takes 2 or 3 years. What the paper and what the research that I found is the congregations almost have to have a courting time. In other words, they need to talk about how do we come together and how can we be independent, be our own church, but what's it look like to share our clergy? And that's where there's a lot of work. I mean, there's a lot of work on the clergy side, don't get me wrong, because they got to really be able to check their egos and that kind of stuff. But a congregation has to, I mean, it can't be it can't be a small majority that says, yeah, let's do this. I mean, that happens. I've served 2 churches that merged, and it's not necessarily a full agreed upon thing. So if you have people who don't really like this idea, it can really cause issues. But there is this courting, this getting to know one another as a congregation. And one of the models that worked recommend that there are groups from each church that meet first, and they get to have it all hash it all out, have the conversation, and then start bringing people in. And one of the ways to do that is to say, look, we're going to Craig Springs, we're going to 111. We'll take your kids up, show them what it is. And you can do it even before there's this community thing to just start seeing. So the kids know, I mean, I'm sure the kids know one another for 5 miles away, but I mean, you know what I'm saying? That kind of thing. Does that help answer you, kind of help you with your question a little bit? And I don't know who that was.
Dan and Bobby from Fort Lewis.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and I know that go ahead, Dan.
My question is that when I hear you saying this, how do you go about mediating this? Who starts first, or how would you start this process of, right now we're in dire need of a youth person. We've gone down to 15 to 3 kids now. We need somebody, and we can't wait too long. And that's the part that I don't understand how you do.
Well, it would
Who
be,
goes first? Right. Who's on first?
You can go first. If you got the idea, you can go first.
Okay.
I mean,
Well, listen, I
would just start the conversation. I mean, hey, what
Okay.
if, do the what ifs and start the conversation. If you know someone over there, and say, hey,
Oh,
listen to this idea, that type of thing.
okay.
And it would be great, to include Bill, since this is Virginia region. I mean, I think Bill's probably got more ideas, but I mean, I just would start moving. I would just start doing
That's
it.
what I did. Good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just follow up with that quick. Is
Yes,
that
thank you.
I'm always looking for opportunities to do this. Sometimes I can initiate that conversation. Sometimes I'm doing search and call, and I see that it's clearly and obvious, and I'll present it to both churches and see if there's any interest. I think the other thing that happens is when a couple, I know that some churches have started just to do one thing together, whether or not that's a picnic or they do a Bible study or they
But now
do
we've done.
right. And creating that relationship, and then somebody says, what if we could do more together? What would that look like? I think having a Greg's sabbatical work and sort of an example and sort of how to go about it, is helpful to put some stuff around it. But I think it begins with, my favorite word, propinquity, relationship, getting together, and not moving too fast, but asking the question and see where it goes. So.
Jump in there. All right.
You want to go to Hilton next?
Thank you. I was recently at the regionals training for ARPR, and there was a conversation going on, and I was too focused on the topic of the day to even remember who was having the conversation, but I remember it was about campus model of ministry, but it was different than Greg has been presenting, in that it's more like what you were talking about, Bill, the congregations coming together with one facility. My concern is that we've got so many of our churches, especially in this area, where all of the buildings are 60, 70, 80 years old, and to have so much need in a physical plant takes away from active ministry opportunities. So just wondering how that gets addressed in all of this.
Excellent question too. That's another Doc Talk coming up. So, there are all kinds of options here. I think Greg's is one of those. I think there are sometimes what stops the conversation is that the idea of that a congregation isn't ready to talk about selling a building or combining or merging or anything like that. I think those conversations have to be had within the conversation. What paths are we willing to go down to consider coming together in what way? I think that's something congregations have to think about, is what are we willing to do? Sometimes it's even hard just to get congregations to considering sharing a pastor and shifting their sacred worship time, because God only shows up at 11 o'clock or 10:30 or whatever it is. So I think there are all kinds of options. And the building question, I've got several churches that are considering selling their buildings, using that money in another way and moving to something smaller, because if they were to become church now, they wouldn't build the building they're building. So that's another question. And I've got coming up Jim Michaels from Church Extension, who's going to be having a conversation, already assisting a couple congregations here in Virginia, having that conversation and figuring out what path. So look forward to that, Dr. I hope I answered that question. If not, I'm willing to follow up too with you individually.
Yes. Also, I was hoping if somebody from the training meeting remembers that conversation, they might get hold of me and let me know who it was that was holding the conversation.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent.
I did not specifically look at that model because I was trying to see how we could do it, keeping the churches in, where they were. So to answer your question, I didn't look at that model. That model is out there, but I did not. I was more focused on this one of the multi-staff or multi-clergy team working with more than one congregation.
Great.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm going to go over to Pastor Easley. Just got to unmute and you're ready to go. Go.
Good afternoon, Pastor Miranda Easley of Shaw Christian Church, located in Eden, North Carolina. As I was listening to the conversation, I was just telling one of our one of the members at our congregation, we have for the last 4 or 5 years, I guess. It's been more than that. Might have been about 10. And we have these 2 other different churches that we connect with. One is Holiness and one is a non-denominational congregation. And the way we have supported one another is we have different events together. And so our relationship is very close knitted because of how we have been doing things for years. And one of the members of another congregation, a Holiness congregation, asked the question, why can't we all merge together? And just like you say, the challenges would be, us, them, so that is one of the challenges I see that we could have. But we have built a relationship that we are in a circle we support each other with whatever events or in planning that comes up, especially with holidays, you know, Easter, New Year's, Christmas, and we take turns of who's going to sponsor it. You know, like Shaw sponsored the New Year's Eve service, but all three churches, it was packed. All three churches came together. Then we did the Christmas at the other location. Then we, any celebrations, all of that, we are in the inner circle and we come together, and we have people that ask us, well, who is in charge? And we say, we don't have anyone in charge. We come together and we make plans, we make the decisions, and we have the order way we do things. And we've been doing this for years. And so I hadn't thought about the campus, you know, about that being a campus situation, but it could be even just for major events, you know, that's coming up. One of the experience that I had when I went to Chalet was you had several different churches that had different pastors, but they did have what I call one overseer that the ministers or the pastors would meet with on that Saturday before their Sunday service. And basically to have a discussion about what they would be presenting to the congregations and making sure that they were on the same page that day. But they would have their morning services, each individual church, but in the afternoon, they all came together in one location. And it was wonderful to see the magnitude and excitement of all of these churches coming together in one location after they had their style of worship or what have you. So I guess I've been in the realm of some things and not even, you know, bringing it to the campus terminology, but I have been hearing more recently a lot of churches talking about, I have this campus over here and we got this campus over there, per se. So I think it's a great idea.
Thank you. And those are the positives. I mean, congregations, especially smaller ones, they love it when lots of people come. And that's exactly how they built that relationship. Is they do events together, and then they share. It's not always at the same church; it's at a different church. And one of the things to, you know, I even saw models where one of the facility wasn't as nice as some of the other facilities, and when they gathered, they go, you know, we really need to repaint this room, and they said, okay, let's bring our resources together and repaint this room, or whatever, or it needs a new roof. They even, as the relationship gets tighter and tighter, all those other things seem to just happen, and that's all part of the positive. Yeah, absolutely. But again, when you rotate it and you bring things together, those are great examples. Thank you for sharing. And those are the positives. I mean, just imagine that with your congregation. That is the positive, and yet they can still walk away and go, look at how, you know, and the other visual point that I don't want us to forget is the other people in the community who don't belong to either one of these churches. They're looking and saying, look at how many people there are at that event. Yeah, they don't know who the members are. They don't know, but they see, when they see, well, I need to check that out. And that was another very positive aspect of the campus ministry when they all did things together. I mean, in the perfect world, this is just my opinion, in the perfect world, in the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, that's what we were supposed to do with district meetings. This is a new model. I mean, we're supposed to do this and it would all work, but for whatever reason, that doesn't happen. So here's our next option, right? I mean, anyway, I won't go down that rabbit hole. Sorry.
Now you're speaking, yeah, my language here. Bill has a question from Northern Lights.
Yeah, it's a quick one, but just just in case you don't know where the Northern Lights is, it happens to be Alaska, Washington, the smokestack of Idaho, and the state of Montana. So it's a pretty big region. And
Wow.
unlike you folks back east, it's still morning here. So good morning, everyone. But my
Thank you.
question is, unlike many of our disciple congregations, we have a number that are property rich, penny poor. And so they've got these big buildings and dwindling congregations. One of the things I'm wondering is, in this model, can you have staff involved as well? So you might have two ministers who and a administrator who shares, not necessarily in a ministry role, but in a support role.
Yes. And that model also, I looked into that model where the administrative staff, secretary, was used for more than one church. Absolutely. Yeah, because there's a lot of, especially after COVID, there's a lot of part-time positions in staffing that we've had to dwindle down. And I even saw Bill, where they shared volunteers who would come in and do, but that's when things are really growing and knitting well together. But thank you. Yes, absolutely. That was very, very positive. And again, every time I read this approach, it was not, well, we share staff because we're dying and all. It was always positive. We're sharing staff until we can hire the person to be on there full time. It's always how you approach it. It's the lens that was being looked through. And the thing that excited me, and I shared with Bill, that I loved about this campus ministry, what I was looking up, is the energy was always about growing, not surviving. And that's kind of the energy that I'm tried to put together in my my work, and that's what I'm trying to make sure I present here today. So
I'm really glad you said that. I mean, as regional minister, that's again why I'm always looking for things that are helpful. I mean, I've had situations where crisis pushed us to this model, because I'm not sure about your people, but sometimes people don't like to change. And it's only in crisis that we do, whether or not that's a pandemic, or I had a church up in Upper Midwest where we had a big flood and one church was completely flooded. And so eventually, while that church was being worked on, that church began to meet at a church that was less than 1.5 miles away. It was just up the street, but they had formed two large building churches over the time period. But because of that crisis, they started meeting together. Now, you would think they would meet in one worship service, but they didn't. They met in two, shared the same pastor, did separate offerings, made sure they were still staying separate. And then finally, someone asked a question after all that propinquity, relationship, and all of that. Someone said, well, why are we doing this? I don't think they could have asked that question in the beginning because they were afraid of losing their identity. In that case, they ended up selling both buildings and restarting into a new church. And that's another option. But sometimes it takes this relationship, and that's what I want to emphasize too, is just sometimes you have to move a little slower and build the relationship and do things together until then you ask this question. And maybe that's about listening for the Spirit of God of what is that direction. We human beings, we need to listen sometimes. So that's why I present this. Other questions for Greg, or just want to make a comment or anything else? I know Greg does have actual paperwork that I did not grade from his sabbatical. It's a really elaborate manual. So I'm sure, Greg, would you be willing to share that with others if they want to take a look at it? You're on mute, so I'm sure you're saying yes, absolutely.
yeah, absolutely. As long as you're not grading me, yeah, you're good. I would absolutely share. But as long as I have no problem sharing. Just remember, it's beginning the conversation. I don't have all the answers. Okay. I just want to make sure that you understand that, because I would love for you to send it back with more suggestions, more detail that you found that would be helpful. I mean, let's just say I started the snowball and let's build it together. How's that? That would be the way I would like to do it. But I definitely will send it if you are interested. Yeah.
Hey, Bill,
Yep, go ahead, Dan.
it looks like Miranda has her hand up.
Oh, do you have another question? Okay, go ahead. Ask away.
Just another statement. I have a friend that is a Methodist pastor, and he started out with 4 churches, small churches that he pastored. Those 4 churches in 4 different locations. But they had been working on getting them to merge, together. But right now they have gotten two of them to merge, together. So when you think about that, the one pastor in different locations, that's the Methodist model that they have been using for years anyway. But this young man, he decided to challenge all the churches that they can come under one. So far he's gotten 2 to merge together. Just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah, I don't find this to be a new model at all, but I find a little twist on it and I love it. Gonna go to George.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm excited about this. Bill, I appreciate the work that you do in leading us. I think this is something that would benefit churches that do engage in this. If there's 2, it would benefit both. And Greg, I'd be interested in getting that, whatever information you have available. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
When I share the recording of this, I will include a link to that for everybody too. So, any other questions for today on this topic? Again, just trying to provide a good conversation with, to help the church. So, and if you have ideas for conversations for Doc Talks that might be beneficial, please let me know. These aren't meant to be webinars or anything else. They're just simply meant to be conversations to help our churches, both in Virginia and beyond. Please send your ideas to me.